Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're watching this. Welcome to the Power Platform Today show. I have with me today a wonderful guest. He's been around the community for a while. I actually just said, just a moment ago, I won't introduce him, but I'm going to introduce him a tiny bit anyway. I've known him for a while, and he is really, really fantastic. So I'm going to bring on Andrew D. Welch. I don't know why I threw in the D at that point, but there's a history there. So here he is. Hello, Andrew. Please
I,
say
I
hello.
I will I will never live down. I will never live down my middle initial. I think it
I,
was. I think it.
I
Yeah.
honestly don't know why I threw that in there, but it's just when I think of Andrew Welch, I think of the D.
It it happens. It happens all the time. Do you know the I mean, I wouldn't expect you or anyone who wasn't there to know the origin story. Keith Watling certainly will never let the origin story go. But
Please do tell, unless of
it,
course it's something that
gosh,
can't be
no, no,
aired.
no, no, no. It was. Oh gosh, it was 2019, and you might remember that at the time. I mean, so first of all, my middle name is David, right? So that is legitimately my middle initial is D. But 2019, you might remember that at the time, the previous incarnation of Dynamics communities, they were hosting these Power Platform World Tour events
Yep.
with Microsoft, and these happened, all over the world. And
Hmm.
I was somehow Manuela Pichler and I got caught up in these, and we ended up going to lots of them, right? Like
Nice.
they invited us along for, gosh, we did London, which was, I didn't live in London at the time, but that was home for Manuela. We did Vienna, which was where she was originally from, but we also did Dublin, and there were just a number of them that we went to, and it was a lot of fun. And at the event in London, she and I are on stage, and we're kind of we're introducing ourselves and saying, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter at the time before we all abandoned Twitter. And I
Always
said,
everything
I
else.
don't know what. It wasn't even something that came over me. I said, you can find me on Twitter at Andrew D. Welch. Don't forget the D. And and I said that because all the time people screw up my email address or my Twitter profile or whatever because they just see Andrew Welch and they leave the D out. But I made the mistake of saying, "Don't forget the D," in a room that included Keith Watling, Lee Baker, Lucy Bourne, like just this cast of people who would never ever let me forget telling 150 people not to forget the D.
I
And
love
it,
that.
it
That
was
that
done
is
after that.
and that is how legends are born. So
If it had been any other letter, right? Like if I was Andrew Benjamin Welch and it was don't forget the B, it would be like, okay, fine, whatever. But it had to be a D. That's there we were.
that is brilliant. All right, that's really good because I knew a little bit, but I didn't realize the full story behind it. So that's good to know.
Someone, and this is sort of a testament to what the I don't want to say what the Microsoft community once was, but back when it was smaller, and I think that, um, people had been just sort of thrown together around these new and emerging technologies.
Hmm.
Anyway, um, one day, the mail came, or I think this was potentially after I had moved to England, so I guess the post came. Um, and there was um, uh, I got this mug, and the mug, it was not signed, it was not from anyone, like I had no idea who it was from, and the mug simply said, "Don't forget the D." That was like just yeah.
Oh, there's yeah. We won't go into that just yet. But okay, so 2019 at least is the first date we
In
hear there.
2019,
So
yes,
to
is
to
when I
be
went from, yes.
to be doing that, you must have been involved a little bit in the community before that. So when did you first get involved in the community, and what was it? What was that?
So, so I mean, the short answer to the question is that I would say I think that I went to my first community event, my first conference that was kind of, community organized, sometime in 2018.
Okay.
And what you what you have to understand is that at the time, at least, and I think that this is still pretty fundamentally true, the community, the Microsoft industry, and the Microsoft community in the United States was quite a bit different than the community in the United Kingdom or in Europe. Um, and if you even look today, there's all of these summits and events and conferences and things that happen. Um, there's Dynamics Minds, which I think is far and away the best sort of not organized by Microsoft event that there is. There's Dynamics Minds, and then there's some of the, relative to Dynamics Minds, smaller ones.
Hmm.
There's Color Cloud, and there's Scottish Summit, and South Coast Summit, and Nordic Summit, and I couldn't name one for you that occurs in the United States. It's just not part of there. Certainly you have Ignite, or you have the Microsoft Power Platform Conference. You have the Microsoft sponsored
Yeah.
events, and then you have, I think that they still do Community Summit in the U.S. I think last year it was maybe in San Antonio, Texas. I didn't
Mm,
I
yep.
didn't go, but there's nothing in the U.S. that is really organized. I want to say at the I don't want to say at the grassroots level, but there's nothing in the U.S. that is organized without a like an actual company that does events around it. So yeah, it was not until I started spending more time in Europe that I popped up and even knew that there was a Microsoft community. And the first event that I went to was one that Janet Robb had organized, and it was held in Dublin. Little did I know at the time, but I met my future wife there.
Hmm.
But in any case, yeah, Janet, I remember she during her opening remarks or whatever, she gave me a sweatshirt, a hoodie sweatshirt, because I was the one who had obviously traveled the furthest, 3,500 miles, give or
Yeah.
take, in order to attend a 365 Saturday.
Yeah, it's so much to unpack there because I've had Janet Robb on before. She was talking about exactly that, and the fact that you
Hmm.
are one of the known at least quantities of Power Platform families that have grown out of this community. So that's amazing. But going back to the North America side, or at least the America side, I can't say North
Hmm.
America because there is Canadian Summit at least now. Um,
There is now, yeah,
uh,
yeah, there is, but that's even a fairly recent
yeah, I think was
development,
this
and
not the
it,
first year, or was
yeah,
it last year was the first one?
there was at least one.
Mm.
I think that last year was the first, but I mean it's an absolutely brilliant move by the Canadian community to, they basically hold this thing the weekend before MVP Summit. MVP Summit is held in Redmond outside of Seattle. They hold the
Yeah.
Canadian Summit in Vancouver, so you can go to the thing. You already have MVPs from all over the world who are flying in, and then, if they go a couple of hours north. Yeah, so it was a stroke of genius to put that together, and I think they have no travel costs. I would assume.
That's interesting as well because there's a pedigree there of UK as well because Scott Durow would have been involved in that, and obviously Scott Durow is a long-standing UK member of the community.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's funny. This is the second time in as many days that Scott Durow has come up in conversation, at least in my conversation. But yeah, I don't know if Scott is part of the organizing of that. I know he lives in
Okay.
in in Vancouver. He moved right around the time I moved to England, which maybe he was just making space for me.
It's an interesting one because Scott's one of those people that certainly for me he's one of the titans as far as community is concerned because I remember reading his blog posts when I started. Like he was at that point he was already blogging about the technical stuff that I was doing every day. So his name is always synonymous with community to me, as is people like Jonas Rapp. So him and the Fetch XML builder. That's kind of I mean, that's going over 10 years now that I knew those names. Um, so that's interesting. So 2018, so you're a relative newcomer to the community space. Before that, like how long had you been working in Dynamics and Power Platform before that? Obviously not Power Platform, but Dynamics.
Well, so I guess the short answer about, and what's the reason that this is a bit of a nuanced answer is that I never considered myself a dynamics guy. I never and I don't even particularly consider myself to be a power platform guy either. If you look at the technology I spend time with, it's neither of those two. So
That's true.
dynamics, I kind of randomly wandered into. I basically I was recruited to a Dynamics ISV um, in uh, around 2011 or 2012.
Okay.
Um, but the reason, so I had going back, I got my first job in IT in infrastructure actually, and that goes back to early 2001 when I was pulling wires through walls and attics and building servers out of parts and essentially installing the physical infrastructure.
Hmm.
So that was from an engineering perspective. That was my technical background was in actual infrastructure when infrastructure was made out of something. Um, but then I got pulled into this Dynamics ISV because they had just sold a piece of work. Well, basically, they had just sold their product to a U.S. government organization, and I
Ah.
was in the Coast Guard. At the time, I was part time. I wasn't I wasn't full time active duty, but I was in the Coast Guard at the time, and the CTO of that company, who was an absolutely brilliant guy. They were small, but the CTO of that company had gone to university or college, as we call it, at William and Mary, a couple of years ahead of me, and the CEO of the company basically just searched on LinkedIn for guy in Coast Guard who went to William and Mary and found me. And I think his basic attitude was, well, the CTO is smart. Let's go find another one who went to school wherever he went. And they called me, and I was sort of cranky that day with my current employer, and I said, what the hell? Sure, I'll come do this thing. I'd never heard of Dynamics. In fact, I actually thought that this recruitment pitch was some sort of scam, right? Because like this was, think about like the visual effects of Dynamics at the time and sort of how it presented and
Hmm.
anyway, I thought it was but yeah, that was we were working with CRM 4. I don't even remember, think it was called Dynamics at the time. But yeah, that's so this was around 2011, I think that I came on the scene because we were just getting CRM 2011
Yeah.
taking over from CRM 4.
Yeah, so I would have been I would have been around the same sort of time. You probably were just a little bit earlier than me. I was there when I started. I was in the consulting side. I definitely was doing migrations from 4 to 2011. Where I
Hmm.
got my starting point was actually as an end user. So I went into a business intelligence role. So
Hmm.
that was what I was doing, was getting data out of the system for a company based here in Edinburgh. And I spent a lot of time in SQL, a lot of time getting data out of the system. And just through doing that, I got to know Dynamics and actually found that I quite enjoyed working with it. And I've always
Hmm.
wanted to do developy type stuff. So I got involved in modifying it, supporting it, and that's what kind of led me to consulting after that. So yeah, fell into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I think that you did what a great many of us
Yeah.
did in that era
Hmm.
of coming to this, to that particular technology. 5 years later, it was a totally, I think, different scene. Um, but I think that at least for me, my experience was looking at it and thinking, this is solid and it allows us to build applications so much faster that are usually, I mean, not you, I mean, almost always sufficient for, anything relational that you need to do. And, remember we were deploying on premise back then. Um, and yeah, though I have always had a strange and sort of a tormented relationship with Dynamics. I remember Lucy Bourne told me years, probably around 20, it could have been when I was living down the street from her and Lee in late 2020, said something to the effect of me that I'm the only person that she knows that has implemented Dynamics at least 30 times and has never actually used it for sales, for marketing, for anything, right? So I actually we at the ISV we used the technology to build custom applications on top of
Hmm.
apps for all sorts of things, right? Like apps for managing the operations of an air terminal at the South Pole, right? Like manifesting humans and cargo on airplanes, so that sort of thing. But yeah, I never actually touched Dynamics for any of its intended stated use cases. Um, which is and frankly I've always found them to be sort of tiresome. Like I with sales is something that many organizations need, but I have could have not have less interest in the actual mechanics of that particular activity.
I mean, that kind of, I suppose, fits in with the way you engage with the community these days, because a lot of what you do nowadays is around governance and high level strategy. I mean, that's the kind of content, that's the kind of thing that you put into the world. So I think you've probably always been thinking more that than the nuts and bolts of I don't care about a sales system. I care about the whole platform. Would that be fair to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think except for the governance part, I'm over it. When there's lots of talented, smart people out there. I remember when there were several of us standing in a room in a conference room in Microsoft trying to figure out how to govern the Power Platform, and that would have been in early 2019,
Hmm.
and we wrote Center of Excellence on the whiteboard for the first time. At least as far as I know, that was the moment in which this concept came. Not some of the components that
Yeah.
had been built, but the concept, like the operating model, came into being, and it was an unmet need. It was something that Microsoft had not before then spent a lot of time thinking about, and we put a lot of energy into it over several years. And then, I think that we did a good job in the world, like in the industry, right? Of getting other people interested in that,
Hmm.
leading others to, I think, believe rightly so that managing the platform at scale was a good and worthy discipline. And now there's people who know far, far, far more about Power Platform governance than I do. It's something that I think about maybe twice a year at this point. Um, so I think that was a for those of us that got to work on that during the kind of the 2019, 2020, 2021 era,
Hmm.
I would say that was a success. It was very cool to work on.
Cool. I want to go back again to the American concept that there were very, very few community driven events, at least back then. And as you say, even still now, I'm really struggling to think of anything that I've heard of. I just don't know if it's maybe a lot more local. And so you don't hear about it unless you're in a local area. Like, I mean, would anyone in the world know that there was a Northeast user group outside of the Northeast in England? Probably not so much. Um,
Y- Yeah, that's an interesting idea. My my thought on this, has always been, first of all, there are user groups
yeah.
in the United States, right? Like it's not like the U.S. is some barren wasteland of a lack of technical talent or interest. But I think that there's several things that drive that. Um, uh, first of all, if you look, and this goes back a few years, I haven't seen numbers on this in a long time, but if you go back a few years, the largest population of Microsoft Business Applications practitioners was in Europe, not in the US and Canada.
Uh,
So there simply were more of them.
yeah,
I also think that um, uh, distance plays a role in this.
yeah,
So because the United States is geographically a country. I mean, it's a continent-sized country, and if you add Canada into the mix, due to the commercial and cultural ties between the two, you get this absolutely massive land mass.
yeah,
Whereas in Europe, you could have the UK user group, and probably within a few hours, most people in the UK could get to that quarterly event that Andrew Bibby either organizes or used to organize
hmm,
in London. So you could build that. Whereas in the US, oftentimes if people live geographically far away from one another, you might see each other once a year or once every 2 years. So you just don't kind of have the um, you don't have that regularity. And then I think that it also plays a role that um, in in the US, people in this particular industry and in lots of industries work far more hours per week
yeah,
than in Europe, right? Like if oftentimes at a consultancy, for example, at a technology company in the US, it's like, well, you bill a client for 40 hours a week, and then you do learning development and pre-sales, supportive pre-sales in hours 41 through 60, right? So working a 50, 60-hour week in the US is not at all uncommon. So you kind of finish with that, and you're like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And even if I did want to talk about this, I don't have time to talk about
yeah,
this. I need to sleep.
yeah.
Um, and it's interesting. It's interesting. I reflect on that with our daughter Alexandra, who's 3 now, and the amount of time that we spend out and about
Hmm,
with her, taking her to the playground after school, or just out and going out for dinner.
hmm.
It's wild. My 3-year-old has a favorite restaurant, uh, but
That's
but
amazing.
yeah, parents, families in Europe, I find, are out and about
Yeah,
much more often, whereas I find that, families in the United States, sort of the home is their castle, and they don't leave it much, but to go to work and to go to school and to go to very, very organized play dates and that sort of thing. So the opportunity for spontaneity, you know, in a place where you can't really get anywhere if you're not in a car.
yeah.
Just the opportunity for spontaneity and for being out and about, whether it's in an industry, in a work context, or in a social context, is just very different.
That's really interesting. Because you would be the right person to speak to about it, I suppose, because you've been, well, I mean, having been from America, having lived and grown up there, but then also living in London for a significant amount of time, and also now living on continental Europe for at least starting there.
Mhm.
You've got a mix of everything, and I think you've always been a bit of a global person in many ways. As long as I've known you, you've been traveling and getting around. Uh,
Y- y- You know what's funny about that? When I was in college, so age 18 to 22, more or less, I went to this school that was had a reputation for being very global. It's, I think, the highest percentage of students at the time. It was in the top like five percentage of students that study internationally, within the United States,
mhm,
I think within universities in the United States. And I, uh, I had some of the girlfriends that I had at the time, one who had grown up in Spain and one who had grown up in Belgium. And anyway, I remember, so for a very long time in my life, I felt profoundly unworldly. I felt profoundly, like, very poorly traveled, very unknowledgeable about the world. So yeah, it was that was definitely something that in my life that I sought to make right, because I just didn't want to regret having not seen the world and having not gone on some adventures when I got to whatever age old is nowadays. It's unclear to me, but I'm starting to feel it.
Well, yes, yes, we all get there. We definitely all get there. I've noticed actually recently that, I mean, my son's 6, so a little bit ahead of you on
Hmm.
that front, but he'll be about 25 kilos now, I think. I think that's where he's at weight wise. Now, that's relatively fine for throwing him around still. But I have noticed
Yeah.
that going up the stairs, especially like last night, carrying him up the stairs, I was huffing and puffing by the time I got to the top. I definitely, age is starting to show up more with me than I would like to admit. So yes,
Well, as worldly and as well traveled as I may have become, I still can't wrap my mind around how heavy 25 kilos is. So I'm just going to go with um 20, I I just don't do well with actually sensible decimalized weights and
what would
measures.
that be? Roughly 45
But
pounds, I think, if we're talking
I guess I
pounds.
don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
because it's 2.2 pounds to the kilo. So you're talking, yeah, roughly speaking, 45, 50 pounds.
Oh my God, I remember when I first moved to the UK and I moved to this little town in the Cotswolds and I loved it there. But I would one of the things that is more common still in the UK and in Europe in general are sort of specialty stores, right? In the US, everyone gets their food from a big supermarket, right? There are very, very few specialty butcher shops for or bakeries or
Yeah.
whatever. So anyway, but I remember I went to go to get some meat, some steaks from the butcher shop in town that I had moved to, and you know, I had absolutely no idea how to describe how much meat I wanted. I was totally at a loss, and I was like, I want this much meat, one. I need. I think I was cooking for it was Lee and Lucy and I, right? And I think my response was something like, I need 3 normal human portions of meat, and that was how I ordered it because I hadn't even anticipated that. I had no idea how many grams or kilograms of worth of meat I needed at the store, and I was so embarrassed.
That is funny. That the difference between America and the UK. I mean, that's not even necessarily the difference between Americanisms and Englishisms. But I find that the cultures are so similar but so far in so many different ways. Like we have quite a lot of the same things, food wise, or
Yeah.
even just like things. We have the same cars. In many ways, we have a lot of the same cars, but we call them different things. Like boots and bonnets and like trunks and boots. It
It,
amazes me how for exactly the same stuff we seem to have all the different words. Even down to if we think of foods, like I think a Milky Way in the US is a Mars bar essentially, or what I would call a Mars bar here. It's a
mhm.
caramel type chocolate.
And I think that it's made by the Mars Corporation. Yes,
Yeah, and
yes.
then we've got a Milky Way, which is a totally different thing. Uh,
The, the one of the very best television shows that has ever been made, at least in my lifetime, and it has to be Ted Lasso
oh, I love
on
that show.
right. And and I watched most of I think the first season came out when I still lived in the US, and then I watched the second 2 seasons in while living in England.
Hmm.
And I remember there's one line where Coach Beard, it doesn't matter who asks who, but Coach Beard and Ted are talking, and one of them asks something to the effect of, um, you know what happens when the team fires you for keeping your cleats in the trunk? And the other replies, anyway, it's you get the boot for keeping your boots in the boot. I don't know why that little line sticks with me, but it does. It does. And though I will say there are, if you look at going back to the idea that America is a continent-sized country,
Hmm.
there are I would argue that there are as many differences between someone from Boston and someone from Los Angeles as there are differences between someone from Boston and someone from London.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is um, there's a lot of variation and difference in the way that things are done and the word choice and the way that people talk, and that's something that I think is not necessarily well known or appreciated by Europeans about the United States.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because in the UK we have a lot of difference between regions over a very short distance. Now, again, that's probably a
Hmm.
function of the overall size of the UK. The UK is a much smaller place. I mean, I think from tip to toe in the UK is just about the same length as the state of Florida. So it's we're small by comparison geographically,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
regionally we have such variety over a short distance. Like if you think of where I am, the difference between Edinburgh and Glasgow, it's a 45-minute drive and totally different cultures, totally different accents, different ways of speaking. And even if you go to the north of England, there's some similar differences there, like the difference between Manchester and Liverpool. That's even closer. I think
Hmm.
they're half an hour drive if there's no traffic, hour and a half if you're lucky. uh, but
Yeah.
a Liverpudlian versus a Mancunian, totally different. And aggressively so. Whereas in
And
America, yeah,
and
as you say, there is differences between cities, but it's definitely spread over a larger area.
mhm.
Although I suppose if you think of, I think of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is so different to other cities around it. I've been to America a few times, but I've not spent
Yeah.
that much time there. Everything I
It,
get is
it,
pretty much culturally from TV or media.
Philadelphia is a strange city. There's nothing inherently wrong with Philadelphia, though. I
Hmm.
mean, could be their sports fans could be a bit more pleasant and a little less violent. But otherwise, I mean, what makes Philadelphia so strange is that it is. Um, Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston have they're sort of right stacked on top of each other. There's about 250 miles between each, right?
Yeah.
So D.C. to New York, New York to Boston, and then D.C. to Boston is about 500 miles. And then you have Philadelphia. Well, and by the way, Washington, New York, and Boston have very strong um, New York is one of the financial capitals of the world. It's home to the United Nations. I mean, New York is New York.
Hmm.
Washington is obviously the national capital, and then Boston has this immense concentration of very fine universities and research and technical. It's I think the arguably the medical research capital of the world. And then you have Philadelphia, which is actually an enormous, prosperous city. I mean, at one point when I was a kid, Philadelphia, I think, was the fourth or fifth largest city in the United States. It's this absolutely enormous city, sort of wedged in between. And folks in DC, New York, and Boston really don't care. And I think that it's sort of like, it's, if you're a Washingtonian, a New Yorker, or a Bostonian, you kind of have this attitude, particularly New Yorkers and Washingtonians. Boston, they don't really interact much with Philadelphia, but for the most part, Philadelphia is essentially just kind of an eruption of needless traffic on the road between DC and New York. And it's quite insulting, I think, actually, if you live in Philadelphia, because like I said, Philadelphia is this lovely, historic. It was the early capital
I
of
was just
the
gonna say,
United
yeah,
States.
yeah, it has pedigree.
Well, in the early days, and I'm going back to when you know Britain thought that the colonies were its, and the colonies definitely thought that they were not. The capital bounced around a little bit between Philadelphia and New York before finally, due to a compromise between the Northerners and the Southerners, Washington was a new city that was sort of built out of a swamp in order to have a purpose-built capital.
Yeah.
So yeah, Philadelphia is not an irrelevant city, but it's sort of an irrelevant city if you are a New Yorker or a Washingtonian. So bless the Philadelphians.
Jeez, that's cool. I need to go to Philadelphia at some point. Boston's definitely on my list as well. Haven't been to Boston yet, but that's one of my ones I definitely want to go to.
I might be biased, but Boston is unequivocally the greatest city in the United States. That is no questions, no questions asked.
See, if you were ranking cities in the US, you are biased, obviously, but if you were ranking cities in the US, New York has to be one of the tops simply for the fact that it is culturally everywhere. It's funny, your
I
camera is
have
actually
no
tracking
idea.
you as you stand up and walk
It
around.
does. It does. I was off looking for my Boston Red Sox hat, but I wore it to the beach the other day because yes, I now live in a city that we just take the metro to the beach. So I have no idea. It could have been lost at sea. I'll have to get a new one. Who knows?
Oh, well, that is all cool. Wait, how long has it actually been since you lived in America? Did you say it was
Mm,
2020 you moved? Or thereabouts?
I moved. Yeah, yeah, I moved. So it's been over 4.5 years now. Um, I did about so it was really from October of 2020 to January of 2025. And in January of this year, Anna and I I say it was January. Anna says it was February. It depends on if you count moving to Spain. Was it going to the Airbnb that you had while looking for an apartment, or was it when you actually moved into the apartment? But I'm going with January. I feel like that extra month adds legitimacy to my claim of yeah,
And
here
then
we are.
and then you could say it's been the year. So that makes
And
sense. That makes perfect sense.
it'll be very easy to keep track of how many years it's been.
Yeah.
Mm.
You want milestones to be at set points like that, January, December, things that make sense. That I agree with. Cool.
Yeah, things that make sense, like the Microsoft fiscal year. Oh, wait. Oh, let's start the year in July, and we'll call it 2026 for the next 6 months.
That's funny actually. I was watching something on YouTube. They were talking about part. In fact, no, I'm talking rubbish. I was listening to Lucy on Neil Benson's podcast.
Lucy keeps coming up today.
And for good reason. I've had her on in the past as well. Fantastic. She is also interconnected in the community within the UK all over. And obviously, having worked in Microsoft in the past, she's very connected in that world as well. So it's no surprise that she comes up. She is fantastic. But she was talking on that podcast about making better connections and getting yourself known by Microsoft. And part of that is kind of getting your offering in front of them. And so internal sales almost within Microsoft from a partner perspective is almost as important as external sales to the public. But she just sort of joked because she was on it, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. She just sort of joked, just don't do it now because it's year end at Microsoft. Uh,
Oh, no, no, no. Nobody at Microsoft, and times are interesting. Times are interesting at Microsoft. Actually,
mm,
I was I was so for context, if anyone is listening to this somewhat after the fact, over the last several weeks, there have been several rounds of layoffs at
mm,
at Microsoft, and something that really just annoys the crap out of me right now is when I see people on LinkedIn pontificating about these layoffs at Microsoft, right? I was talking with someone about this yesterday, and anyway, so there's basically the world, sort of the media, and I think maybe to a larger extent the population who cares, sort of the industry community
mhm.
somehow made this when these layoffs at Microsoft began, they extrapolated from this that Microsoft was laying people off because AI had replaced these jobs.
Yeah.
And um there now is this counter narrative, and I saw this on LinkedIn the other day, that, oh, no, 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 the reason that Microsoft is lying, right? The reason that Microsoft is laying these people off is because they've overinvested in AI, and AI is turning out to be hype. And the reason this makes me mad is because neither of these things are true.
Yeah.
Microsoft never claimed that they were laying people off because AI had replaced their jobs,
Hmm.
right? My, that's a nonsense claim that Microsoft has not made. And I think that, listen, it will all pass, but I think that I survey with the help of my LinkedIn feed, I survey some of the nonsense that is out there surrounding this current era of still the early days, right? I think we're still very early days with artificial
Hmm.
generative and agentic artificial intelligence, and there's so much nonsense out there.
Yeah.
So I do just want to anyone who has stuck with us for this long, I just want to say Microsoft is not laying people off because AI has replaced their jobs. That is absolute nonsense, and Microsoft has never claimed that that was the case.
So I don't really follow a lot of um, business dealings and things like that. I was talking to Graham Taylor, guy that was on a couple of weeks
Mhm.
ago. He was my first mentor in consulting, and we talked about it on that podcast. He follows really closely the business side of Dynamics and Microsoft and everything else. And he was
Mhm.
always
Mhm.
talking about different partners within the UK, who's started, who's merged, what's happening. And he seems to know the ins and outs of all of it. I put you in a similar sort of area in that you will both be well read on the subject and follow these things. I don't. So I'm probably much more of one of those sort of lay people that will see something on LinkedIn and will probably be like, oh, yeah, there's another 2,000 jobs gone because of AI. And so it will probably seep into my conscious that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Which is, and I mean that is really the problem with social media in so many ways. It's so easy to get that wrong information if that were the case, because you're just reading the headline. You're not doing anything else.
Well, and it's so easy to amplify it
Yeah.
too. And there are so many people. There's one I saw someone recently. I couldn't tell you who it is, but whose LinkedIn headline claims to be a top AI voice. And I honestly didn't care enough to. I instantly knew that they were not. It's like the time my sister brought home a boyfriend, a new boyfriend, and the claim was made that, oh, this one is reputable because he has one of the highest security clearances that the government can give you. And my first response was, no, he doesn't, because if he did, you wouldn't know about it. It would be a secret.
Yeah.
Uh, and I put top AI voice in the same category. Anyone who claims that they are a top AI voice, not a top AI voice. And I need to remember this because now I can't ever put on my
You can't
LinkedIn
ever say
profile that
that.
I'm a top.
Nope, never.
But you know what? It's not my style. It's not
No,
my
no,
it's
it
not my
isn't.
style. I am a voice. You can decide if I'm worth your time.
I think that's that's the world of social media, and in many ways, the last I don't know decade maybe of internet influencing this concept of getting out there and sort of making your own brand. Part of that is to sort of say things like, "I'm the top AI." It's like, well, on what metric? Like, who's measured that? Where's that coming from? And I think
I,
that's one of the
I don't.
issues with. So just I'm interested in this, even though we're starting to run out of time. The How are you going to teach your daughter in a world of social media and influencing going forward to assess information? Have you thought about this yet? Because she's obviously 3. Oscar is older at 6, and I am seriously concerned about it because he uses YouTube as much as anyone else does these days. He knows how to turn the TV on and navigates the videos. He learns stuff from YouTube, which I don't necessarily mind, but I don't at this moment curate that, and I haven't gone down the route yet of properly teaching him how to assess information and information sources. Because to be honest, I don't think he'd take it in yet. But he is a native. He is an absolute digital native at this point. And I'm starting to worry about it because I don't know what to do about that.
So, I mean, first of all, for perspective, we're still very much at Bluey. So
which is fantastic.
we're
I mean, Bluey is a fantastic cartoon that Oscar has learned so much
yes.
from because they do it's such a good show. It really is.
There are, and I'm not ashamed to admit this, on several occasions I've been watching Bluey with Alexandra, and afterwards Alexandra will go to bed and I will tell Anna, we saw this really great episode of Bluey earlier today. Can I show it to you? Because I find that Bluey is at least as good at explaining parenting
Yeah.
as it is at explaining childing. So,
Yep.
so anyway, but I digress. Back to your question. I, this is something, to be honest, that I I think that it is unknowable until you're doing it.
Yeah.
Partly because I think that the norms and the norms and the expectations change so quickly that sitting around thinking how are you going to prepare your 3-year-old to be a good consumer of information is probably a, a fair bit waste of time. Um, just given the fact that uh, how your 3-year-old consumes information it may not have been when Alexandra is old enough to consume information and have to decide if something is true, she might be doing it via technology that doesn't exist
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I have significant worries, and this is, in part why we launched the Center for Trustworthy AI recently. Um, but I have significant concerns about, among many, and we define trustworthy AI so broadly, but I do have significant concerns about how information is passed off and consumed by, reasoned over, and then passed on by artificial intelligence. And I have my concerns about this are multifold. First of all, a lot of the way that I think probably you and I, have historically discerned if information was of a high quality or truthful or accurate was, I mean, listen, a lot of misinformation is just poor quality,
Yeah.
right? Like the writing is bad, the presentation is bad, but once that information is consumed by artificial intelligence, it is then presented and passed on in such a way that is much higher quality
Yeah.
than the crap that we might have seen previously. And then I think there's a second order problem here. And the second order problem is once artificial intelligence, as artificial intelligence has increasingly begun to populate the internet with information and data, what happens now as future models of AI are essentially trained on synthetic data,
Yeah.
right? So as the misinformation, it's like it gets baked again and again and again and again until it really fundamentally looks like factual, accurate things written by humans, and I think it's a big problem.
I it's funny that there's a film which I hope you've seen, Idiocracy. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's a brilliant film.
I saw it long ago before. How do I put this delicately? I saw it long. I want to be allowed back into the United States next time I visit. So, um,
That's true. You can't
uh,
say anything on this because it's on the
I
internet.
know, I know, I know. No, I saw it before it became very concerningly accurate. So yes.
And that's exactly it. I remember watching it, and at the time, I was like, I could see this being a reality. Like the way the premise of the film, the way it's constructed makes perfect sense if you look at the world. And for anyone that hasn't seen it, I urge you to go and watch it. It's almost prophetic in how it looks at things. But the thing there is that it was about marketing and this consumerism, basically dumbing down the intelligence of the population. And so this person a normal average person in, I think it's early 2000s, ends up somehow getting cryogenically frozen, wakes up in the future,
Mhm.
something like 50 or something years in the future. And he is by far the smartest person in the world because everyone else's IQ has dropped so badly over the time because they just follow all this marketing gumph that goes out there. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what you've described. It's not marketing, but it is. AI has the potential to do that because people don't, they'll take it as writ and they won't necessarily go and study the concept or think about it anymore. And they might end up making decisions that might make sense. Like one of the things in Idiocracy, they they learn that through marketing that these energy drinks are amazing. They're so good for you. They're really, really good for you. So why wouldn't you put them on your crops? And so they start seeding all the crops with this energy drink that essentially introduces this thing that kills brain cells and over time just kills all of their good nutrition. And so they're basically dying out because they've done this stupid thing. But that's the kind of thing that you could see AI would come up with. It would literally have read something somewhere that says that Monster energy drink is fantastic. It's so good for you. So it's obviously got all the nutrients that your barley needs. So you would want to use that to water your plants.
In the very, very early, like in the opening months of the generative AI boom, um, I said, I said to somebody that that AI has this quality, generative AI has this quality of being the ultimate mansplainer, right? It will pontificate and comment on topics that it knows nothing about
Yep.
and do it with such
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. So, and I still think that is true.
Hmm.
I think that the quality of the responses has become dramatically better.
Hmm.
And I think that some of us have become better consumers of it. Um, but there's a lot of things that I think there's a lot of things I don't that I do myself, that I do manually
Hmm.
still. Uh, and that's not to say, I mean, I use AI multiple times a day, and I'm not even talking about the instances where I use it, and I'm not aware or conscious of using it. But
Yeah.
um, when I sit down with an organization and help them. Now, this is ironic. I spent a lot of time, and over the last year and a half since I started Cloud Lighthouse, our company, and then when we launched the Center for Trustworthy AI a few months back. I've worked with organizations in I think 12 countries now to help them build their AI strategy, their roadmap, their architecture across their
Very
uh,
nice.
their their technical ecosystem. And anyway, so I sit down and I do this, and I take everything that we talk about and everything that we learn um, in these discussions, in these workshops that I do with these organizations, and just for fun, just to sort of see, I give it to you know I've tried a few different AI products and models, and the strategies and the approaches that these things come up with for how this big global organization should use AI or effectively use itself, right, are comically bad. They're just not useful. So
Yeah.
that's one where I actually do the mental work, and it is a lot of mental labor. Like I'm exhausted after I do one of these, which is potentially why I'm hanging on to this conversation, because that is what awaits me the rest of the afternoon is working on one of these. And I'm always very happy with the end product, but oh my God, it is exhausting to produce.
I absolutely feel your pain, and as someone that has gone through workshops that you have run in the past like that on a you know past work world, then I know exactly what you mean. That's a good place to finish the wonderful conversation we've had. I like to at the end I have some rapid fire questions, so let's
Okay.
launch into those and we'll see. I know the answer on some of these already because we've covered some, which is great. Favorite Power Platform service?
Dataverse.
Good choice.
Does it count? Does it count?
Of
Does
course it
Dataverse count?
does. Absolutely it does. I know
Okay,
it's not
okay.
advertised as a pillar of the Power Platform as such, as in, Power Apps,
You,
and then you got BI and Power BI and so on and so forth. But Dataverse underpins everything. So yeah.
you can't build a data platform without Dataverse anymore. It's just that many don't realize that yet. Okay, next question. This is rapid.
Favorite conference.
Well, I'm going to have to go with the Brashov Forum, which is the new conference that the Center for Trustworthy AI is organizing in early December. But favorite existing conference not organized by me or folks I work with have to be Dynamics Minds.
Nice. I thought that would be the case, but the other one, so this is one thing I quite like about the rapid fire questions at the end. It always brings up other stuff that I want to talk about. So I'll have to get you back on at some
We'll
point
do
in the
another.
future.
We'll do another one.
Last music you can remember listening to.
Oh, last music that I can remember listening to. Um, I think I think it was either I'm almost certain it was the soundtrack from Hamilton, which I sing with my 3-year-old.
Nice.
Fortunately or unfortunately, for her.
I like that.
The backstory is that my 3-year-old, our daughter, is named Alexandra Jennifer Welch, and the main character, the historic character of Hamilton, is Alexander Hamilton. So it turns out that Alexandra Jennifer and Alexander Hamilton can be sort of substituted in for one another on a lot
Nice.
of these songs that mention his name. So that the soundtrack is a fixture in our home.
Oh, I love that. That's really cool. Podcasts or TV?
Mm, definitely. Oh, you mean for actually acquiring information or for entertainment
However you
purposes?
take the question.
Oh my God, we've been living in the golden age of television shows since for a
Oh, it's
little
so
like
good,
maybe
isn't it?
13 years
Yeah,
since
yep.
since Game of Thrones came out, and we're gonna ride the golden age of television until it becomes crap like the movies.
Oh, it's it's scary how many shows are out there that I just have to watch and I love, but I just don't have the time now. Yeah, it is really, really good out there.
Yeah, and Anna is a big reader, like a big book reader. I'm a big reader of sort of magazines, essays, things like The Economist, The Atlantic, those sorts of that format. So
Mhm.
we're both big readers. We read very different things. But you know what? I we don't the evening is not complete until we've sat there, drank a glass of wine or several together, and watched at least watched an episode of a really good show. And there are so many of them. So,
Yeah.
but I do love my podcasts. I think that the Ezra Klein show from the New York Times is Ezra Klein is he's American, but he's one of the I think he is potentially the foremost journalist of our generation.
Hmm.
Um, and I find his podcast to be absolutely brilliant. His guests are brilliant, and they have gotten me through a lot of laundry folding and house cleaning over the years.
Yeah, I think it's when you become a parent these days, it's I don't understand how anyone doesn't have AirPods or something like that on them all the time to just take up those little moments, just stick an ear in, start listening while you are watching the latest episode of some really bad kids TV show that you don't want to watch. That isn't Bluey, because as you say, Bluey is enjoyable. Um,
Bluey is enjoyable. Bluey is, and we now have Alexandra has a book that I got her for her birthday, and it's a Bluey book, so it reenacts some of the episodes in book form, but the
yep.
book is in Spanish.
Nice.
So I read it to her often, several times a night, sometimes, because she now is effectively trilingual. She speaks English,
Wow,
Spanish, and Romanian.
that's amazing.
And yeah, no, it's I'm very proud of her and I'm very relieved. But anyway, so it's quite interesting, right? Like I'm reading in Spanish the exploits of a family of Australian dogs. So it's there we are.
Oh, I love it. If you had 2 hours with no other responsibility, what would you do?
I'm a big napper. Like I love to sleep, but so I think 2 hours of no responsibility. I think that it depends on what overtakes me first. Sleep or a YouTube rat hole. Um,
Yeah.
because 2 hours can be burned away,
Oh
can be
yes.
burned away very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, it definitely, the algorithms are strong.
Yes, yes.
Books or audiobooks?
Um,
I need to add a new magazines to this question now.
yeah, yeah, definitely not audiobooks. Definitely not audiobooks. I like books. I just don't have, which is weird because I'm an actual published author, but I don't read a lot of books because I don't have the patience for them.
Mhm.
I don't have the patience for them. So yeah, but I would have to go with books. Have to go with books.
Cool. Glass half full or half empty?
The glass is absolutely. I am. I am. I am a devoted optimist. The glass is almost always half full.
Wait, what is almost always as in it's sometimes half empty or it's almost always just about half full?
Oh, I think
It's trickling to
probably
full.
very little in life is perfect. And I'm okay with that. But yeah, when the glass is when the glass is anything when the glass is in between empty and full, right? So when there's I will always see it as being half full.
Well, I think that's a perfect ending to a wonderful conversation today, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining me on the show and for all of those out there listening. Hope you enjoyed that. Do please go and listen to some of the other guests I've had in the past that have actually been mentioned. I mean, Lucy, Chris didn't come up, funnily enough, but he should have. Chris Huntingford,
So
Keegan.
strange. I mean, I talk with the man 4 times a day at least. So that's yeah, so
Is
strange.
is also a very good episode. Definitely Lucy Bourne, one to listen to. Keegan was my first guest. She was brilliant. So yes, thanks everyone, and thank you again, Andrew. That's been fantastic. And goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Reese.